All right, welcome in. We're the Real Selection Committee. I'm Mike. This is Greg, and we brought back Will. We'd like to thank you guys for checking us out here. So I'm briefly going to go over, we're going to talk a few things today. We're going to talk about conferences, the champions, who we think is going to make it in. We'll get into the 12 teams. We'll throw out who we think is going to make it in, the 12 or best 12 teams. We'll briefly talk about what happened this last weekend. And the last, we're going to do our favorite part is picking the games for this week 13 coming up. So let's, it was a crazy week this week we had. We had some big games in there. Some people won and some people lost. So what do you think happened this week?
Well, I'll tell you what, the week was great. Another fun week. You had some teams definitely step out of their shadows. You had a few teams drop out of that list of teams that were competing for the playoffs. Had one team, in my opinion, sneak in there that none of us was even considering a couple of weeks ago, right? Yeah. So we'll just see where it goes from here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Greg said is exactly spot on. We're starting to see that playoff start to form a little bit. Obviously, nothing's solidified until conference championship week is over, so anything can still happen. But you're starting to get an idea of what this 12-team field might look like. There's teams week in and week out like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon had a scrappy game, but these teams that are continuing to win, find ways to win and push for that playoff. Then you have teams that are starting to fall off. BYU squandered their chances a little bit this year. Not out yet, but a big loss. Tennessee losing by a couple scores against Georgia. So some things happened, and, it's just going to keep getting more fun.
Right. So let's talk about these conferences and who's in and who's out. So this SEC is a zoo right now. I don't know how this committee is going to pick, who's the best team in there, So my thought is I have Alabama, Texas, Georgia are clearly the ones that are in, and who's going to make. Is there going to be 4 teams or is there going to be 5 teams that make it in? How do you guys see this going?
Well, the way I see it, definitely going to be 4. Now, depending upon how Penn State and Indiana finish the year out, could determine if there's 5 or even 6.
Wow.
Okay. But don't count Texas A&M out of that, because if they win and then beat Texas at the end of the year, they're the one team we know will be in. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be settled in there. Any of those 6 teams can get in, but there's going to be, in my opinion, at least one of them that's going to be a little bit upset.
Right.
Something I heard this weekend that kind of blew my mind is I was watching the South Carolina-Missouri game, which, by the way, absolutely insane finish to that game. And the announcers were talking about, even with 3 losses, South Carolina's not out of it if they beat Missouri. But, I mean, they're not too far-fetched. South Carolina has a couple big games left on the schedule. After that win, they'll be ranked in probably the top 17, so they're not that far out. 2-3 weeks to go. The SEC is a dogfight right now.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think Ole Miss is even a team. You mentioned the 4 that you feel are locks. Ole Miss has a very favorable final 2 games. I feel like at 10-2, a win against Georgia, the resume is there. They also could be that 5th team that I feel like is kind of locked at this point. So it's going to be very interesting. Obviously, the Big Ten having a big role in that as well. If teams start falling there, makes more room for the Southeastern Conference.
Yep. Right. Yeah, so that A&M and Texas game, I think, is going to be huge on who's letting these teams in. I really think that's going to shape that up. So let's go into the Big 12. Right now, I think it's anybody's game in this conference, right? With BYU getting upset by Kansas, Colorado looks to be the best team in this conference, right? So we got Iowa State that they dumped a couple games, but they had a big win this weekend. And now you got Arizona State in the mix, and they have a couple games coming up that are going to help change this conference right here, this Big 12.
Arizona State's game with BYU is a big one, because the loser of that is probably in big trouble. Because Colorado, although they got a sneaky game with Kansas, which sounds funny, but Kansas has played good ball over the last 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So if Arizona State upsets BYU, I think they punch their ticket in the Big 12 championship game, but it's not settled yet.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Greg. I think Colorado's at this point locked into the Big 12 championship with their schedule. I'm feeling really good about their team and what they're putting on the field right now. with a favorable schedule, Kansas and Arizona or Oklahoma State. And I agree, Arizona State BYU almost feels like the semifinals to the Big 12 championship. Whenever that game holds that second spot, and right now, I mean, Colorado's they're playing the type of football where you don't want to see them on your schedule. So for me, the Big 12 kind of feels like it's theirs to lose. But there's still 4 teams in contention for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. So let's talk about the ACC here, right? SMU had a big game. They upset or beat Boston College. That was a good win. Miami was idle, so they didn't have a game here. Clemson made a big step forward, knocking, I think, Pitt out. I think Pitt's eliminated from the conversation. So I think it's a kind of a 3-team race here for this ACC.
Yeah, SMU looks like they're the team that's going to be in. I honestly think Miami's going to get in too. I think Clemson is in a little bit of trouble. They're done, I think, in the ACC, so they're complete. We'll see if Miami can catch up. Miami's 5-1, so I think Miami's still the favorite. We'll just have to see how that unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right now, SMU and Clemson actually hold the ACC championship spots. Now, if Miami wins out, Clemson and Miami would both be 7-1. I'm not sure who has the tiebreaker in that situation, but that could be huge because I think if Miami does their job, goes 11-1, they're in at large no matter what. But if Clemson has a chance at the ACC championship, that could open the door for 2 ACC teams to get in because Clemson getting that automatic bid. So there's a lot to happen there too. I think SMU has a very favorable schedule as well. I think they finish 11-1, go 8-0 in ACC play, and they're kind of a lock right now for me in that conference championship game. But it's going to be interesting to see if they get Clemson or Miami there.
Yeah, right. All right, so now let's talk about the Big Ten, right? Wow, Oregon had a big scare this weekend going in and playing Wisconsin. They won by a 3-point win. How did that look? I mean, what are you thinking now with Oregon struggling? Ohio State started slow, pulled away, and Penn State beat up on Purdue. Indiana was idle. So those are really the 4 teams to talk about. So, Indiana's going to have a big game to prove next week on where they shape this Big Ten, right? I think if they lose this game and they lose big, are they going to get bumped out and the SEC team take their spot? I mean, how's the panel going to look at this game?
Well, let's start first things first. Oregon did struggle, but that's football. Every team in college football has a game like that where they struggle. We could pick Georgia's schedule apart. We could pick Alabama's schedule apart, everybody. So Oregon, to me, is still the number 1 team. They struggled, but they got the job done. And in the end, you don't get 2 W's for blowing a team out. So Oregon's still number 1. Ohio State's got to take care of business with Indiana this week. If Ohio State were to lose to Indiana, they could be in a little bit of trouble. Could be. Now, Indiana, in my opinion, Indiana's got to either hang with the Buckeyes or beat them. If Indiana gets blown out, I think their chances go out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And Penn State's got to look very impressive down the last couple of weeks here. They do have an interesting game with Minnesota, and Minnesota could end their season if they beat them. I think the Big Ten should get 3 teams in, maybe 4, depending on how the season finishes out. But it's going to be awful tough with all them SEC teams.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance at 4 getting in the situation, like you said, if Indiana hangs with them or wins. Indiana gets blown out, it opens the door, it opens the conversation of do they deserve to be there. I think that their resume is there. I mean, obviously, I haven't had the biggest strength schedule, but the point differentials there. That offense looks good. The Big Ten's weird for me because it's a conference where there's a lot of those scrappy teams that will sit around 5-5, but they're no pushover. The Nebraskas, the Minnesota's, Michigan this year, Wisconsin's one of those teams. Mm-hmm. And that's why when I look at this Oregon-Wisconsin game, I'm like, you saw a scrappy defensive effort that they never faded. They pulled out, won the game. You could argue Ohio State had that similar type game to Nebraska. Mm-hmm. So like you said, everybody has those types of games, but with the Big Ten, you weigh them a little more because USC's another one, 5-5. These teams aren't 5-5 teams. You know what I mean? Yeah. So the Big Ten's interesting, but I think there's a very, very good chance that we see 4 of them get in.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, the thing about it, Indiana's schedule, it was pretty weak strength of schedule, mm-hmm. and that's going to be always debated on, strength of schedule, why a 2-loss team in the SEC who they beat each other up are they more deserving of over Indiana when Indiana's playing some really bad teams, and every Big Ten school they played have had down years.
Well, one more thing on that. Yes, Indiana's schedule's been a little softer, but as Will said, they are just running through everybody. It'd be different if Indiana was sneaking by 23-16 every week. They're blowing people out.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And yes, the SEC teams have a great strength of schedule, but within that strength of schedule, they are losing games. So you know what? Don't lose to Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Don't lose to Kentucky. Don't lose by 18 to Ole Miss. You have some warts on your schedule. All these teams that want to pick apart Indiana, look at yourselves. Indiana's done what they're supposed to do. Now, as we said, if they get blown out by Ohio State, it's over because now you can play your schedule is weak.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, 11-1 or 12-0 is still 11-1 or 12-0.
The most interesting thing for me ahead of this game is Nebraska. Ohio State had their struggles in that game. Mm-hmm. Indiana beat them 56-7. So there's no saying that Indiana by any means is a big underdog in this game. I think they can hang with the Buckeyes. Now, I probably am leaning Buckeyes, and we'll get into that later, but Indiana's a solid squad for sure.
Yes, they are.
Right. Okay. So now let's talk about some of the other group of conferences, the other Power Five, or however you want to consider them, right? So the standout teams are Notre Dame and Boise State, right? Those are the standouts. Who else do you want to talk about? Who else do you want to bring in this conversation?
Go ahead, Will.
From outside of that, Army is still on the radar. I think they have the biggest game in probably school history coming up this Saturday.
Sure.
So, they're not out of the conversation, still undefeated. They beat Notre Dame. There's a lot to be said after next weekend.
Yeah, right.
And then Tulane is a big one for me as well in that American Conference, sitting at 9-2. They have a big game with Memphis left, also sitting at 9-2. They, peaked into the college football top 25 this past week, so they're already, on the radar of the committee. Obviously, you get a big 35-0 win against Navy, who's kind of falling apart right now. Wheels fell off after the Notre Dame game. They're still 7-3. You put it to them. Tulane's another one of those teams to look out for.
Yeah, those are two teams I like.
I like Tulane. They've been doing the things what they need to do. I still like UNLV if they somehow, some way can find their way into that Mountain West Championship game. And if they could beat a Boise State in that Mountain West Championship game, that could jump them in. We just have to wait and see. But I agree. Boise State is definitely right now the odds-on favorites of the group of five. Tulane would probably be sitting there as the number 2, or Army. I don't mean to just dispel Army, but Tulane's that team with that name recognition. So it's easy to kind of lean towards them.
They have big wins in the past 5 years.
Sure.
Knocked out the Sooners,
Right. They're one of them teams. It's just easy to lean towards them. Army's still in there. Don't forget about UNLV.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. All right. So since we talked about all that, let's jump into these college football rankings. We have our own rankings here. So let's talk about. So we had a complete chaos this week, with BYU going down, Tennessee. Now where are you putting some of these crazy SEC schools? Miami's idle. What happens with them? Are they going to fall since they were sitting at home? These undefeated teams like Indiana, are people going to feel pressure with Indiana being up there with a weak strength of schedule? And, Army's creeping up in there like we talked about, This your big game is this weekend against Notre Dame. They win that game, I would almost want to put them in just because of that. It's a big win. So, Greg, let's talk about your 12 teams that you come up with.
Well, I got to say, first and foremost, it's very hard to split this. I have the most respect for the SEC teams and what they're doing. It's not hard to win in that conference, but it isn't easy to win in any of them. So, with that being said, number 1 for me, and I'm going by the seeding. This is how I would have the playoff if it started today. Oregon's number 1. They're the Big Ten champ. I don't think you can argue too much with that. Texas right now would be number 2 because they are sitting atop of that, or the SEC. I realize they're tied with A&M, but if I play the projection game like so many other people do, you kind of think Texas will beat A&M. So they would be the SEC champ right now, excluding the SEC championship game. I got BYU still sitting there at the 3rd seed because they are the Big 12, top of the Big 12 right now. I mean, but they kind of look like they joined Iowa State getting off the wrong way. Mm-hmm. But we'll see how that plays out. I got SMU as the number 4. They're the ACC champ. As it sits right now, probably the one team with the shoe-in to get into that championship game, but we'll see. I got Ohio State as the number 5. You know, the Buckeyes are what they are. Big game with Indiana coming up. That's all the marbles riding on that one. I got Notre Dame at 6. You want to talk a team that has gotten rid of the loss? That's Notre Dame. Boy, they are beating people up and looking like they're going to be a problem. Number 7 is another team that's done the same thing. A doggone Alabama, number 7. How can you argue with them? They look like a top 3 team in the country to me, folks, and that's big coming from me. Number 8, I don't know how this happened either, Georgia. Georgia actually has one of the best resumes in the country with their wins.
Yes. Yeah.
Problem for them is they do have 2 losses, but I put them at number 8. Got to give them that respect. Number 9, lo and behold, we have another SEC team, Texas A&M. You know, 1 loss in the conference, close loss to Notre Dame to start the year off. So, I mean, this is a team that can get in there with the best and hang in there. Number 10 is Boise, and Boise State could move up. New information found to me may move them up pretty far in the next one, but for right now, I got them at number 10. Indiana's my number 11. They are undefeated, folks. They're blowing through everybody, and you know what? We got the big game this week, so that'll decide a lot for Indiana. Number 12, I got Ole Miss. Ole Miss is that team in the SEC right now. They've been a team that's hung out there in the past. They haven't quite been able to do it. This year they put a spanking on Georgia. They look pretty tough. And teams that are just right on the outskirts but could sneak in there. I got Tennessee, Miami of Florida, Penn State, Army, Tulane, Clemson, Colorado, Arizona State. And there's a couple other ones, but I'm going to stop with that. Okay. And it's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah.
Going to be fun.
Definitely.
So for me, I'll go ranking them, how I'd rank them without seeding, and I'll say what seed that would make them. So in the top spot, I have Oregon. I agree. I think that's the clear-cut number 1 right now, which would put them at the 1 seed Big Ten championship Big Ten champion right now. My number 2 team in the country is the Buckeyes. This would, however, put them in the 5th seed since, you know, top 4 go to the conference champions. I think that Oregon-Ohio State game, if we see it again, could be really fun. Obviously, it was really fun the first time. I don't think anybody will complain if we get to see it twice.
Nope.
And that would carry a lot of weight. But in 3rd, I have the Hoosiers. Some will say they struggled with Michigan. What I saw was a gritty win in a situation where a Michigan team was giving it all to ruin a season. I really like what Cignetti's done with that program. They're undefeated, so how can you argue that they shouldn't be up here? That, however, would put them in the 6th seed, again, due to the Big Ten just being overloaded right now. In 4th, I have the Longhorns of Texas, putting them in the 2nd seed. Again, their lone loss is Georgia. It wasn't a pretty one, but they came out the next week, did what they needed to do. Big blowout win. They beat Arkansas by 10 this past week on the road, and Arkansas has been a scrappy team. They knocked off Tennessee earlier in the season, so not a pushover win by any means. In my 5th spot, I have Penn State. This would put them as the 7th seed. We finally got to see that offense come to life a little bit against Purdue. It was Purdue, but still good to see them come to life a little bit because that's been the biggest question mark for them so far this season is the offense. Can they hang it with the big dogs?
Right.
In 6th, I have the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. I agree. They've done a really good job at kind of erasing that loss. Now it still lingers. There are still people talking about it. I totally get it. That's a big loss. But Texas A&M every week is making them look better. You still got Army in a big game this Saturday, which is kind of crazy to say. USC is going to try to play spoilers. It's a big rivalry. But they're sitting and they're beating teams by multiple scores, not making it look pretty for the other team. In 7th, I have Bama. A couple weeks ago, I was like, are they in? Are they out? Man, have they answered that question the past couple of weeks.
They definitely.
So I have them in 7th, which put them at the 9th seed, making an interesting Notre Dame-Alabama matchup in the playoffs, which would be fun in South Bend. That'd be a fun one to watch nonetheless. In 8th, I have Ole Miss. So this is where it gets fun. I actually put Ole Miss ahead of Georgia because I played that we had the head-to-head.
Yes.
So I put Ole Miss in the 8th spot, putting them 10th in seeding. Georgia is who I have in 9th. I agree they have a great resume, but it's hard for me to rank them ahead of Ole Miss and Alabama just because we saw who won those games.
Agreed.
So Georgia would be sitting in the 11th spot. Now this is where it gets interesting. Boise State is my 10th ranked team, which would put them 3rd in my seeding due to them being the 3rd highest rated conference championship at the moment. And then 11th, I'd have Miami. They're actually my first team out of the playoffs right now, though. This is where it gets really fun because in 12th, I have SMU, and they technically hold that ACC title right now. Miami's not even in the title game right now, so SMU would be my 4th seed at the moment. And then going 13th through 15 real quick, I have Texas A&M, Tennessee, and Colorado would have the 12th seed in the playoffs being the Big 12 title.
Outstanding.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go with the rankings, and I'm going to stick with the committee's rankings. Just go off of strength of schedule or however their rankings would be. My one, obviously, clear cut, Oregon. Ohio State's number 2. I'm going with Texas as 3. I'm going with Penn State as 4. Indiana's 5. And I'm starting to struggle with this, but it's going to be proved this weekend of whether they deserve to be at that spot or not. Yeah. You know, if they win, that's great. If they lose close, then it's great. If they lose big, then it's trouble time for Indiana. Alabama's jumped all the way up to 6, and like you said, we were worried about this team even making it in, but all these other teams are fumbling and losing, so I got them at 6. Notre Dame's at 7. They're looking great. I think they deserve to be there. I got Miami at 8. I liked where they're at. I know they were idle this weekend. I don't think they should lose too much just because they were sitting at home. They still have been looking good this year. I got Ole Miss at number 9. I got Georgia at 10. I got to put Georgia behind Ole Miss because we all saw them get beat. So I cannot put Georgia ahead of them. I don't care strength of schedule. You didn't do it on the field. So you don't deserve to be in front of them. I got Boise State as 11. I got SMU as 12. I got BYU at 13. Tennessee's dropped all the way down to 14. They're struggling right now. A&M's 15. Colorado's in the mix now. They can get into this. They definitely can have a good shot at getting in the playoffs, but they could definitely jump up into the higher rankings. So that's the way our rankings went. We had fun trying to figure out who's who, and not all 3 of us don't even have the same. So it's tricky. You know, it's tough out there for this committee. So now let's jump into and talk about what happened this weekend, right? So let's talk about the biggest game. Number 1, Oregon played Wisconsin. It was Oregon had to scrappy win this game here. It was 16-13. It was a pretty ugly game for Oregon to win this game. Wisconsin's a tough team to beat. So how do you guys think that looked for Oregon?
Yeah, for me, the big positives to take away from this game is your defense did what they needed to do, especially down the stretch where the offense kind of fumbled away a couple opportunities there at the end. And then I really liked what I saw from James in the rush game. He went over 120 yards. He found the end zone, which was not found a lot in this game. But he looked really good. The kicker, also a positive, if you talk about another positive. But how I look at it is we talked about it a little bit already. It was a scrappy win. It was an ugly win, but a win's a win. Mm-hmm. And Wisconsin's never one of those teams that will shy away from a big game. And you went into Wisconsin.
Camp Randall? Yeah, that's tough.
It's a hostile environment, to say the least. Sure. So I still look at it like they're the best team in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing people got to understand about Wisconsin, they are built to play in the Big Ten type games.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They may not do well against teams outside of the Big Ten, but within the Big Ten, this team is built to play that kind of football. Mm-hmm. Oregon went in there and they finally had that game where they did not look real good.
Yeah.
But as we said, every team on this list has had a game like that where they struggled with somebody they probably should have put to bed early. Mm-hmm. Just the way football goes. Oregon's still the best team in the country. They did what they needed to do. That's football, baby.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about Ohio State Northwestern. Ohio State started out slow, then they found their groove, put up 21 points in the second quarter, and it should have been a bigger spread, but I'll take the 31-7 win. Ohio State's still one of the dominating teams. And
They could have beat them 59-7, and there would have been people out there saying, "Well, you played nobody." Okay, Northwestern, yeah, no one on the national scene respects them. But Northwestern's another one of these Big Ten football teams that plays Big Ten football. They have had a knack at playing Ohio State well over years. They've even upset the Buckeyes a few times in recent memory. So no game when you get into conference play is easy. It's just not. So Ohio State wins 31-7. Hey, that's a good win.
To piggyback off that too, when you're a team like Ohio State, you're always going to have the biggest target on your back. I mean, you got these teams. Alabama's going to get everybody's best. Notre Dame's going to get everybody's best.
Right.
Oregon's going to get everybody's best. How I look at Ohio State is they're a team that you can't get comfortable with because you can have the best first half in the world against this team, and they get better as the game goes on for sure. I'm really liking what I'm seeing from Jeremiah Smith week in and week out. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with for a few years to come. That's for sure. You got that two-headed monster in the backfield that's looking very reminiscent to Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in the NFL. If you're going, a little comparison there. So having a lot of fun with those two. On paper, I mean, Ohio State might be the best roster in football, in my opinion. So they're still right there behind Oregon. You have that head-to-head matchup we saw between them, so you can't put them ahead of Oregon. But that's what I mean by I don't think anybody's mad to see that game again. Because these two teams, it almost feel like a national championship before the playoffs.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yep. So let's go to talk about Texas. Texas played Arkansas, and this was a tough game. Arkansas is another tough team that you don't want to mess around with, and Texas won 20-10. So how do you see that one?
Well, Arkansas is one of those teams like we were talking about in Northwestern and Wisconsin. They are one of them teams that play SEC football. They hang out there. They, over the last few years they've been down, but somehow, some way they find a way to play tough against good teams. Texas, they have the bad loss to Georgia, but Texas to me is the best team in the SEC as it sits right now. They won the game. Doesn't matter how, they won. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. There's not much more to say. You can say they should have won by more than 10, but again, they went on the road in an SEC conference stadium in Arkansas, and they did what they had to do. They won the game. Quinn Ewers played a pretty decent game. He, anytime he's on the field, you're going to get some electricity. And I'm liking where the Longhorns are sitting. They kind of had a scare there after losing to Georgia by 15, but they've done what they needed to do since then, and they're back in that right there in that top three, and I think that's where they belong.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this one where changed a lot of things here. BYU and Kansas. BYU has struggled the last 2 weeks. They almost got beat last week. Now they come into this week, and Kansas gets them. They beat them 17-13. So what are we thinking about BYU right now? Are they still the dominating team?
For the moment, it's about to get worse for them because here comes Arizona State. Brigham Young's been flirting with disaster here. They almost lost to Utah and maybe should have. Got a little lucky, got some help. Utah decided to stop playing after halftime, though, and kind of stalled out. And Brigham Young come back, did what they needed to in that game. Somehow Kansas is starting to figure into the Big 12, and they're not even in it. not even in the race for it is what I'm saying.
Right.
Boy, I'll tell you, Brigham Young has got some work to do.
Yeah, they definitely.
BYU is an interesting team for me. When I was on here 2 weeks ago, I thought Utah had a chance to upset them, and honestly, a controversial pass interference call was the difference in that game. I believe that it could have maybe gone the other way, but it went where it went, and the game finished in BYU's favor. BYU is just one of those teams that they should win most of their games with how the quarterback's playing, how the defense plays, but they also could lose in a game. I mean, we talk about how they have Arizona State left. I don't think that they're a team that you could even shoe in a win over Houston in their final game. Houston obviously 4-6. BYU's the much better team on paper, much better team all around. But it just BYU has that feel to them that they're going to keep every game close. And after almost losing to Utah and then losing to Kansas, I think the confidence might waver a bit. So it's going to be interesting to see if it turns into wake up, we got to go, or if it causes a meltdown.
Right.
Last game I want to talk about to finish up what happened this last weekend is the Tennessee-Georgia game. And we kind of thought that the loser of this is going to be out of this SEC mix. And had it been Georgia, I was pretty much writing them off. They won this game. They won by 2 touchdowns, beat Tennessee. Now, where's Tennessee in this? I mean, are they still going to get in or?
I think Tennessee's the one team in the SEC that's in the most trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is they still have Vanderbilt left at Vanderbilt. And we've all seen Vanderbilt is not a pushover. And I think Tennessee maybe has the least impressive resume of those teams left. They do have the big win over Alabama, which you got to give them credit for that. And they're a super good team. And by saying what I'm saying, in no way, shape, or form am I saying they're bad.
Yeah.
They're a darn good football team. But I kind of thought Georgia would be out if they lost. Mm-hmm. Funny, they go from being out to in my top 10. I did kind of overlook Ole Miss, so maybe I overshot them a bit. But, hey, Georgia's resume is pretty darn impressive when you start looking at their wins. Tennessee, I think, is in a little bit of trouble. They could get saved if some things go wrong in that Big Ten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're not out of it by any means, but like you said, I don't think they have the firepower in their last 2 games to push them ahead of anybody, say they win those games. Right. I think that Georgia game was big. I think they'll just be looking out. They'll be one of the first 2 teams out come this week, and, probably as the committee continues to roll, but things can happen in front of them. I mean, BYU has that big game left. Anybody can get upset. I mean,
That's
Alabama,
right.
Auburn at the Iron Bowl has been a phenomenal game to watch the past couple of years, even when Alabama and Auburn aren't on the same level of play.
Yeah.
So there's no saying that it's over for them by any means, but a 14-point loss hurts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that'll wrap up our what we felt was a big deal in this last weekend. And let's pick some games. This is the funnest time right here. We like doing this, see how well we do here. So let's start with our first game that I want to talk about is going to be Penn State versus Minnesota. Penn State's favored by, 12.5 points. And it is in Minnesota. How do you guys feel about this game here?
This is a much more interesting game this week than it was a month ago. Minnesota was not looking good then. Minnesota's rebounded and has played some good football. They did lose a game, I think it was last week, but Minnesota's been playing a lot better football, and they're dangerous. They're another one of these Big Ten teams that just hang out there, and they love to spoil people's season. I don't think they're going to beat Penn State. I'm taking Penn State to cover that because I believe Penn State knows what's in front of them. If they don't win big, they could be outside looking in. I'm taking Penn State to do what they need to.
I'm in the same boat. The offense proved something to me last week. The defense continues to be one of the dominant forces in college football. I think they handle Minnesota on the road and win by 14 plus, so I think they cover. Minnesota has played spoiler. They kind of ruined an Illinois season earlier. They took down a USC team that was looking good when they played. I just think Penn State's going to be too much from the handle. I don't know if they'll move the ball well against that team. And I think Drew Aller is going to continue to show that this offense can put up some points.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think Penn State, this is another statement game for Penn State to prove that they're worthy of their ranking and prove that they're worthy to make it into this playoffs because they're another team that people are, they haven't played anybody really. Their schedule's not strong, but it's still Penn State. They're not that explosive team. They're not going to blow everyone out, but they're going to win games. And I think they're going to beat Minnesota. They're going to cover. I think that it's going to be that 14 spot on that. Also, I agree with you there. So the other game we'll talk about, Ole Miss is traveling to Florida. Ole Miss is favored by 9.5. So
you want to go first?
This is, Florida looked good this last week in beating LSU. So who knows what you're going to get with Florida?
I'm gonna keep rolling with the Rebels. A couple weeks ago, I had them in upset fashion taking down Georgia, and they made my dreams come true that week. I think they continue to roll. They know there's a lot on the line in these last 2 weeks. Obviously, that coming off that big one in Georgia and a bye week, I think they're going to be well rested. I think they're going to be fired up. They know that they're 2 wins away from potentially being in the college football playoffs. I think they go into Gainesville, and I think they cover. I think this is a pretty dominant game by the Rebels. I think Kiffin's going to have those boys fired up.
I think a lot like you do. The only thing I will say is Ole Miss, when you study them, they're kind of, especially since they got in the SEC, up one week, down the next. Now they put 2 good weeks together by that smashing of Georgia. Florida's crafty. I mean, they're a sneaky team. I just can't put my trust in Florida against Ole Miss. I'm taking Ole Miss as well to cover.
Yeah, I agree. Florida is tough. They're playing much better than people thought at the beginning of this year. I'm going to go with Ole Miss, and I think they are going to beat them by more than 10 points. They're going to cover this. So let's move on to the next game. And this game is a big, impactful game for me. Army versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame is favored by 17 points. So to me, this is going to shape a lot of things here. Can Notre Dame make it with a loss? And where are you going to put Army with a win? I mean, this game here is a big deal right here.
I'm going to say I think if Notre Dame loses, they're in a lot of trouble. And I think anyone would. That would make losses to Army in Northern Illinois, which I think would be just too much to overcome with all the potential 2-loss teams out there. But that ain't happening. I'm sorry. I mean, Army's a good team. They're a great story, and I think we all love the fact that's a 9-0 team because I can't remember the last time they were 9-0. Army and Navy, they're not built to handle teams like a Notre Dame or an Ohio State or an Alabama. They're just not. They're gritty. They're tough. They can hang with some of the mid-level teams. Notre Dame's going to bomb them. I mean, Notre Dame covers.
Navy has beat the Irish twice in the past decade. That was Brian Kelly Irish. I really like where Marcus Freeman has this team. Obviously, again, they had a big loss early in the season. I think that loss was the best thing that ever happened to them because this is not the same team. Army, they play scrappy military football. They're undefeated. This is the biggest game probably in school history. If you really go back and look, you could probably figure that out. Other than Army and Navy playing every year, but Notre Dame loses, they're done. I don't think there's a chance that they make the playoffs, especially like you said, too many good 2-loss teams in that SEC and Big Ten conference. So a loss here, the Irish are out. This is one where I would alt spread it and go Notre Dame minus 30.5. I think they win this game by 31 plus.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's a great story with Army being undefeated, and I would like to see them pull this upset, but there's probably not a chance in heck. So, Notre Dame's going to beat them by 17 points. To me, Notre Dame has had credible wins. They beat Texas A&M at the beginning of the year. Louisville's a big win. So they've had credible wins. Really, Army, they haven't played anybody that you could really speak on. I mean, their biggest game is Notre Dame, and then next week against Navy. That's that big rivalry game there. So, I just don't think that they have enough to stay in. I'm going to go with Notre Dame as well. So the next game we're going to talk about is going to be Colorado versus Kansas. And Colorado right now is favored by 2.5 points. So it's a really close game, which, this spot's kind of crazy to me because Colorado looks like the best team right now in the Big 12. And Kansas is what? They're probably 6th seed in the Big 12. Yeah. So it's going to be rough to pick this one.
Well, here's the thing. We looked at this game a couple of weeks ago and basically just put Colorado right over top of them. Didn't even think about it. Not so fast. Kansas has just played lights out these last 2 weeks. And that's the Kansas I thought we'd have from the beginning of the year. I really thought Kansas was going to play a factor. They've missed shot. Colorado should win this game. My only question is Colorado going to come in here over arrogant, like they got it easy, or are they going to come in here and understand the mission is at hand? I'm going to go with Prime's going to have them ready to play. They're going to beat Kansas. They cover.
Yeah, Kansas sitting in the 11th spot right now in the Big 12, which is crazy to think.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, everybody thought there was going to be a big season from Jalen Daniels and the Jayhawks. They've kind of underperformed. They were 2-6 before these past 2 weeks where they've played spoiler to the Cyclones and Cougars. But I agree. I think Prime's going to have this team ready. I think Colorado is just playing the best football we've seen them play since probably the 90s.
Yes.
And I think this is going to be a pretty ugly one. I think the minus 2.5 is very, very, very disrespectful. This is another one that I could think could be a 30-point game.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, coming into this game when you look at the stats, they're pretty evenly matched, even though Colorado is clearly star-studded with players on their team. They got, 2 Heisman hopefuls. One really pretty much is going to be Travis Hunter, and an early drafted QB being Shedeur Sanders. So they got more star power than Kansas. They should pretty much walk over them. They're definitely going to cover that spread right there. I think it's a in the bag game there.
Yeah,
so
-2.5 is an easy pull for me.
Right. So the next game we're going to talk about is going to be BYU and Arizona State. This is now an important game for both these two teams because the loser of this is out. Arizona, this is at Arizona, so Arizona State is favored by 3.5 points. You think BYU is going to get it done?
That's probably the toughest game on that to pick, in my estimation. I was really high on Brigham Young. I was rooting the pom-poms for him. And Arizona State, I really don't know a whole lot about them other than they're a pretty good team, obviously, right?
Mm.
You know what? I'm going to take that the loss Brigham Young had is going to unravel them, and I'm going with Arizona State to win the game. That's what I see.
For me, I have a feeling that BYU is going to bounce back. I know I said earlier, they're one of those teams that could lose to Houston. I think they could. I think they could definitely lose this game as well. But I think they are going to bounce back and get this one. I just think that, you talk about star power. I think Retzlaff is a better quarterback than Leavitt. And I think that's going to be the big difference maker there. I think BYU, if it comes down to who can put up more points, I'm taking the Cougars. I know they just put up 13 against Kansas. We have seen them put up 40, 35 plus a lot this season. So I'm going to go BYU on the road, gets the win there, and covers +3.5 for sure.
Right. Yeah, this is shaping up to be a good game. I'm going to stick with BYU. I think they're going to beat them by a touchdown. Arizona State's looking good. I mean, it is in Arizona State, so it is kind of a scary game. But I think BYU is going to get the job done. So let's move on to the biggest and best game of this weekend. It's going to be Ohio State versus Indiana. Ohio State's favored right now by 11.5 points. To me, this is a win. Has to be a big win for Indiana. I mean, if they lose, I'm really worried about what the committee's going to think about them, because when you think about their schedule, who's their biggest, most impressive win? I want to put the Nebraska game where they stomped them 56-7 in there. They beat Michigan 20-15. Both those teams are like 5-5 records. It's kind of a weak schedule, so I think the committee might throw some points against them on that schedule. So how do you have this playing out?
Well, the committee might throw shade on them, but how many games has the committee ever played? I would question that. It's not that they won the game; they destroyed people in those games. So that changes it. It just does. Now this is a different animal coming into town, or they're going into the animal's cage here. I should say.
Yes.
And it's a hard game to call. You know where my heart is, obviously. Buckeyes got to make the statement here. And I think Ohio State goes in there, and I think Ohio State beats them by 17.
This is such a tough game for me because you look at like matchups like Nebraska, like Northwestern, like Michigan State. Indiana scored more points than the Buckeyes, but Ohio State gave up way less points. So other than the Nebraska game, obviously, that's the outlier where Indiana had their perfect football game. But it's a tough call because I think Ohio State has that defense that Rourke has not seen yet this season. You're going into the shoe. This is tough because that line is a really good line. I think I can safely say money line, I'm going Buckeyes. Ohio State wins this football game. But do they win by 10? Do they win by 14? That's where it's tough. I'm going to go Ohio State covers, however, -11.5. Do I love the Cinderella story of Indiana? Would I love to see this be a really good game? For sure. But I think just like I said on paper, Ohio State has the best roster in the country. And I think it's just going to be too much for the Hoosiers to handle.
Right. That's what it boils down to me. The Buckeyes have a star-studded team on here. so many guys returned. They brought in a bunch of stars coming in, and I think they're clearly on paper and on the field better teams. Now, it's all going to fall on the shoulders of Will Howard. He can't make mistakes in this game because Indiana's defense is pretty good. Indiana's defense is 4th in yards per game and 8th in giving up points in a game. So they're a tough team. Ohio State has to play mistake-free, and I think they can win this game big. And I think they will win by 2 touchdowns. That's tough to say because sometimes they come in and they look great, and other times they fall flat. It's going to be a good game, and Ohio State to me has to prove it still. They still are at this point where people are looking at them going, they're so good on paper, but they can't prove it to anybody. So are they going to prove it in this game? To me, I think they are. So you got some interesting stats.
I got an interesting thing. Everybody talks about you should shut them bums out. You should just murder that team, right? Well, I did some looking through the schedules today. Out of 1,340 games, 1,340 games, there's been 37 shutouts. That's less than 3%.
Mm-hmm.
That includes, the Georgias playing Tennessee Techs and Ohio State playing Akron.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that easy, guys.
You had Alabama playing Mercer.
Alabama played Mercer this past week and it gave up points.
Right.
It's never easy to shut a team out. It's even less easy to blow them out. It's just hard to blow people out when you're playing Division I football and you got a tough schedule. Mm-hmm. So stop worrying about who they played and worry about how they play.
Right.
There you go.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming on, guys. It was fun, and we got a couple more weeks, and then it's really going to be big time for us. It's going to be fun. Keep an eye out for us. We might even go live for you. We want to thank you guys. Like and subscribe and comment. We will get back to you. We'll even talk about it here on the show. Thanks for watching.
Peace.